Most people who start smoking meat want to make perfect ribs. Do you want to make perfect ribs? But the problem is most people cook ribs by time, and what you need to do is cook using a thermometer and some simple hands-on techniques that I'm going to show you in this video. Otherwise, your ribs are going to turn out too dry or too tough or too mushy, and you're going to be sad. So I made this video especially for you so you can make perfect ribs without any guesswork, without any frustration, and without wasting time. So let's start off with the first step. Step one, selecting your ribs. There's two main types of pork ribs. The first are baby back ribs. They look like this. This is a heritage breed of pork, so it's a bit smaller, but this comes from the top of the animal, right by the loin along the spine. They're usually much smaller than spare ribs at around 2 pounds all in, which is why they're called baby back ribs. They don't come from a baby pig, they're just smaller than spare ribs, and that's why they're called babies. Baby back ribs have a lot less fat and marbling throughout the meat, but the meat that they do have is super tender and delicious. Because baby backs are much smaller than spare ribs, if you go by a recipe that goes by time, and that recipe was designed for much larger spare ribs, then guess what? You're gonna overcook these ribs. Moving on to spare ribs. Spare ribs come from lower down on the pig. They come in slightly heavier than baby backs at around 2.5 to 3 pounds on average. They're considered fattier and more flavorful than baby backs, and they have rib ends attached to them. You can see the rib end portion right here. If those are trimmed off, so if we trim off this part and we trim off this right here, then we get what's called a St. Louis style cut. Step two, the best way to trim your ribs. It's always a good idea to remove the membrane on the back of the ribs. It's just really chewy and gross if you cook with it on, so it's best to remove it. All you need to do to remove it is just take your knife and find a bone, get a little piece of the membrane just leveraged up like this. Okay, so we've got it started, and now we're gonna take a piece of paper towel. You can just use a small one. We're going to take that little piece of membrane that we've got started. We're gonna get a good grip on it with the paper towel, and then we're just gonna rip. Now we didn't get this side as much, so we're just gonna lift that up again, get a good grip on it, and then just rip the remainder off. At this point, you can also trim off any large pieces of fat that are remaining on the back of the ribs if you want. For example, there's this huge piece of fat right here. So I am just going to slice that right off. And there's a couple more. You can see all this fat on the back. That's just gonna get burnt up throughout the cook. So we just wanna remove that. It's really easy to cut through. Just have a sharp knife and you can basically just shave it off like this. And we're done. Overall, this only took me about 5 minutes. It's super fast and simple. At the bare minimum, you just have to remove the membrane. That's all you have to do. Let's move on to the next step. Step three, rubbing your ribs. Now we're gonna have some fun, guys. We're gonna apply some rub to these ribs. I just whipped this up. It's in the description section below if you want this recipe, but you can use any rub you want. The only thing that I'd recommend for pork ribs is go heavy on the sugar. Sugar goes amazing with pork ribs, especially brown sugar. So we're going to start with the back side of the ribs, and we're going to add a little bit more salt. We'll just do a special layer of salt on the back because this side of the ribs is the first part that's gonna hit your tongue when you bite into it, and you're going to encounter all of that salt and seasoning, and it's really gonna be a flavor explosion. That's a competition pitmaster secret, so take that home and use it. Now we want to apply some rub. This rub also has salt on it, so we're getting kind of a double layer of salt, and we don't have to be really careful on the back here. We're just broadly applying this, not being too careful because this isn't the presentation side. And then we're just gonna pat that down a little bit. We'll flip it over, and this side does not get an extra layer of salt. It gets an extra layer of rub because we want to really accentuate the sugar flavor on this presentation side of the ribs. So I'm being a little bit more careful. I'm just going back and forth, trying to evenly coat these ribs. I'll do one coat, and then I am going to do the sides. So we'll make sure that the sides are coated. And now because I want to add some extra sugar to this side, I'm going to do another layer of the seasoning, a bit higher up this time. All right, now I'm happy with that. We're gonna let this sit at room temperature for half an hour just to let the meat sweat out and soak in all of that salt. This is an important step before putting it on the smoker, so make sure you wait for the salt to do its magic. Part 4, smoking your ribs. Preheat your smoker to 250 degrees Fahrenheit and lay the ribs down with the meat side facing up. In this video, I'm using my Traeger Pro 575 to smoke these ribs, but you can use any smoker you want as long as you can get the temperature to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now take your probe thermometer and place it right in the thickest part of the ribs, right between the bones. Make sure you don't touch any of the bones with the tip of the probe because you'll get a false reading. Now guys, this is really critical for this method to work. You need a probe thermometer so you can monitor the temperature without opening and closing the lid all the time. If you don't have one, I'll link it below in the description section so you can pick one up. The Traeger also comes with a built-in probe thermometer, and a lot of pellet grills also do if you have another model of pellet grill. Now, why am I using a thermometer? Why don't I just take any recipe off the internet and cook by time? For example, a very popular recipe is the 3-2-1 recipe. You smoke the ribs for 3 hours to get that nice smoky flavor in the bark. Then you wrap it tightly in foil to tenderize the ribs, retain moisture, and then you unwrap it for the final hour to tack up the sauce and get some final smoky flavor and dry out that nice bark on top of the ribs. Why don't I just follow that recipe and say to heck with using a thermometer? It's too complicated. Well, like you learned earlier, ribs come in all sorts of shapes, weights, and sizes. A heavy rack of spare ribs is gonna cook a lot slower than a really light rack of baby back ribs. So if you use the 3-2-1 method to cook both racks of ribs, one might be way overcooked while the other might actually be undercooked and really tough. So at some point in the history of barbecue, some really smart people, probably competition barbecue cooks, said, look, we're gonna stop guessing and come up with a technique that eliminates all the guesswork and the judgment calls from this process. So these smart pitmasters kept the same technique as the 3-2-1 method, but instead of using time to tell them when to switch between phases, when to wrap and unwrap, they used temperature. In other words, we'll use temperature to take all of the judgment out of the equation so that all you have to do is monitor the temperature, and as a beginner pitmaster, you don't have to screw up 100 racks of ribs in order to learn when they're done. So with that in mind, we're gonna smoke these ribs until they reach an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. The baby back ribs that I was cooking took about 60 minutes to hit 165 internal, and the spare ribs took 90 minutes, so a little bit longer to hit that 165 internal mark. Step 5, wrapping your ribs. When the internal temperature of the ribs hits 165 Fahrenheit, take them off the smoker and prep your foil. 165 is the temperature where the cooking process starts to slow down, the ribs start to stall, and you're starting to lose a lot of moisture. So we want to wrap them really tightly to cook them faster and retain all that moisture and make them super tender. So lay down your foil, add some butter, some brown sugar. We're gonna add some honey onto that foil. This is gonna add a ton of sweetness, and it's really gonna elevate your ribs and make them taste awesome. Now lay the ribs down, meat side down, rub them around a bit to coat them evenly, and then foil them up. Right before you close the foil, leave a little space in the foil open and pour about a 1/4 cup of apple juice or other fruit juice into the package. I'm using pear juice, which pairs really well with ribs, no pun intended, but definitely the traditional juice to use is apple juice. This added juice is really gonna help cook the ribs and add moisture and tenderize them while they cook in that foil. Now the ribs go back on the smoker at 250, and you're watching your internal temperature probe until it hits 202 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the temperature when the connective tissue in the meat is really breaking down and it's tenderizing those ribs. So when it hits that temperature, I like to probe the ribs with my ThermPen instant read thermometer to confirm that they have reached at least 202 degrees throughout. Now, remember when I talked about those smart pitmasters who started cooking by temperature and not time? Well, the older pitmasters saw these guys probing their ribs and hooking them up with all sorts of wires, and they said, wait a second, young guys. Temperature doesn't always tell you when ribs are done. You need to look at the ribs and get hands-on to tell when they're done. And the old pitmasters are right. We need to do the traditional hands-on tests to confirm when the ribs are perfectly done. We do this test when we unwrap the ribs, and it's called the bend test, or also the tear test. When you pick the ribs up, hold them with a gloved hand or some tongs about halfway down the ribs. You're looking for the ribs to bend down in a U shape. and the top of the rib should start tearing away a little as they bend. If they bend into a U shape and tear on the top, then they're done in that foil. The baby backs only spent about 20 minutes in the foil until they got to 202 degrees internal, while the spare ribs took a full hour to get to that point, which is 3 times longer. So it really goes to show that you need to cook by temperature and not by time. If I had cooked both of these ribs with the 3-2-1 method, those baby backs would just be mush. Step 6, finishing your ribs. Now these ribs are looking awesome, but they're not done yet. There's one final step. We need to lay them out on the smoker again, unwrapped, and we gotta glaze them with the sauce to tack up that sauce and get them really sticky. You can use whatever sauce you want. I'm just using some Diane's rib and chicken sauce here. I like it because it's nice and red and it's very sweet. And we'll let that sauce tack up for about 30 minutes to an hour, or as long as it takes to get a nice glaze on top of those ribs. It's important to note that once I unwrapped these ribs, they actually dropped in temperature all the way down to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, all the way from 202. So the internal cooking process, once you unwrap them, is pretty much done. So you can cook them for a little bit while longer uncovered and not have to worry too much about overcooking them. If you're using a pellet grill like the Traeger Pro 575, then you can turn the temperature all the way down at this point to 165 or 175, and that is going to produce a lot more smoke and a lot more smoke flavor that those ribs are gonna soak up. All right guys, these ribs are done and they're looking awesome. The last step is to slice into them. I'm using a brisket carving knife. It's very effective at cutting ribs. All we need to do is flip the ribs over. And now this is to make it easier to cut straight lines because now you can see the ribs. So all we want to do is start making slices right down the middle of each one of those ribs. And we'll take a look at one of these. So the spare ribs, nice pink smoke ring along the outside, looks really nice. Retained a lot of moisture. If we squeeze it, you can see all the moisture coming out. That's gonna be good to bite into. The baby backs also have a smoke ring, more prominent because this is a thinner cut of meat. Also very juicy, nice tacky, sticky sauce on the outside. That looks great. So I'm gonna bite into one of these now. Let's take this one, see how it tastes. Oh man, that's good. Remember how we put the extra salt on the bottom? You can really taste that flavor first, and then you get hit with the extreme sweetness of the top. All that honey and all that brown sugar and the spice rub that we added with all that sugar already in it is really coming through. You can also taste the smoke, and it's got a nice sticky consistency. Also, this is what we're looking for, guys. See that nice clean bite mark there? All of that meat on the side didn't pull away with the bite mark. That's exactly what we want. That is a perfect rib right there. We don't want ribs that fall off the bone necessarily, unless you really like ribs that fall off the bone. But I'm used to competition style ribs, and this is what the judges really look for. And I think it's a good way of eating ribs. It's not too tough. It's not too fall apart tender. It doesn't have the consistency of pulled pork that just mushes apart and falls apart in your mouth, but it's got some bite to it still. So let's take another bite of this. That's real good. So let's try one of the baby backs now. That was the spare rib. So we'll take one of the baby backs. Take that guy right there. We'll take a bite of it. Again, nice clean bite marks. There's not as much meat on it, but the meat is very tender. And again, it's very sticky, it's very sweet. You can taste the salt on the bottom. This actually has a really sweet flavor in the pork itself. It might be because this is a special heritage breed, I'm not sure, but this actually tastes a lot different than other pork that I've tried, and it's really good. I'm surprised at how good it tastes. Oh man. Now, if you guys remember, I was also doing some rib ends while I was cooking these other ribs on the Traeger. So with these rib ends, I cooked them all the way through wrapped. I was really trying to render out all of this pork, just like I would do a pork butt. And I'm gonna take a rib end here that I previously cut, and you can see that there's that little bit of cartilage inside it. That is a rib end, and when you render it down, by cooking it all the way wrapped and leaving it at 200 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit, for about an hour, it's gonna be really tender and you're gonna be able to bite right through that cartilage. So I'm gonna take a bite of this cartilage. You can see the cartilage right there. It's that white part, and I'm just gonna bite into it. That's good, it's crunchy, but it still comes apart in your mouth and it's delicious. And that's how you do rib ends. And that's how you get the most out of all the trim and the rib ends that come with your ribs. Instead of throwing them in the garbage, you can just overcook them and make them really tender. So guys, now that you've mastered ribs, the next thing you're gonna wanna do is master the king of barbecue, brisket. Smoked brisket to be exact. I've got a video right here that walks you through the whole process from start to finish and makes it easy. So check that out and I'll see you in that video.